Hi, and welcome to Be Your Own Best Coach Conversations, where you can learn to shift your mindset, change your behavior, and do more stuff you care about. I'm Glen Lubbert, one of the co-founders of Be Your Own Best Coach, a 5-week group coaching program. In this special episode, I share an excerpt from one of our Be Your Own Best Coach guest contributors. It's part of a series of guest interviews within the program. Let's take a listen. Our distinguished guest today is Dr. Alex Dimitriu. Alex is the product of an engineer and a pianist, and a balance of art and science guides his career as a psychiatrist. He brings a deep respect for science, philosophy, and spirituality into his work. Professionally, Alex is a dual board certified in psychiatry and sleep medicine. As a consultation psychiatrist, he specializes in interplay between the mind and body. In his work, Dr. Dimitriu helps his patients optimize peak performance by day and peak restorative sleep by night. He has been nationally recognized by the New York Times, Men's Health, Cosmopolitan, Psychology Today, NBC News, and among other media. Alex serves as a medical reviewer for Business Insider, the Sleep Foundation, and is a contributing author to the Encyclopedia of Sleep Medicine. Welcome, Alex, and thank you for speaking with us today.
Thank you so much, Glenn, for having me. And it's great to be here.
So today we want to talk about sleep as a vital sign for the mind. I really like this concept you have. How is sleep a vital sign for the mind? And how does sleep affect our mood, memory, anxiety, our sex, and our diet?
So sleep is such a fundamental part, I think, of our mental well-being. Part of the issue being, I think, that especially in the field of mental health or mental performance and optimization, there's really not much you can measure. Everything is sort of subjective. Everything is, mood rating scales. At the end of the day, I think there's nothing in my field that's as objective and easy to track as sleep. Why? Because sleep at the end of the day is an absolute number. It's easy to track it. It's easy to see how much of it you're getting, how little of it you're getting. And we kind of have normative values, which we can use to kind of assess what is the right amount of sleep. We'll often say that the internist can track your cholesterol, can track your blood pressure, can track your EKG. In anything mind related, there really isn't much to measure. Even like fancy fMRIs, even fancy, EEGs, neurofeedback, all that is, it's somewhat objective, but it's still lacking this objectivity that we have when we look at something like a high cholesterol, for example. So for me, sleep is really the only signal that we're getting from the mind that we can measure objectively that tells us, how restored the mind is, and how able is it to rest when allowed to do so. So it's both. It's interesting to measure as a health sign if people are getting enough of it, but also the pattern of sleep, whether people have trouble falling asleep, waking up in the middle of the night, or staying asleep, or they're sleepy during the day, or they're alert during the day. That always kinds of provides a lot of meaningful information as to how amped or how relaxed people can be. And one of the interesting things that I do in my work that we use the sleep metric is I almost call it like, I feel like all human beings exist on a spectrum between sleep and wake. Some of us can be too awake, and that's anxiety. And some of us can be way too sleepy, and that can often look like depression. And everything in between is how we live our daily lives. And there's people that might be a little too on during the day. And there's also people that might be too low and sluggish during the day. And sleep and the balance between sleep and wake becomes an essential metric there. So to answer your question, sleep is a vital sign because it's something that we can measure that pertains to the mind so closely. And it exists alone in a field where there really isn't much objective data.
So it's interesting. So then when we look at that, the sleep as a vital sign, as a data point, what are we looking at? Are we looking at the total amount of time we're sleeping? What is that metric?
That's a very good question. And I remember reading an article actually about one of the new Apple devices, the watches, I think, where they were saying that it's better than telling people how much deep sleep or how much REM sleep they got. It's better to just tell them how much sleep they got. And the reality there being, it's interesting because sometimes people, I think, obsess about, oh, I didn't get enough REM sleep or I didn't get enough deep sleep and so on. And in some ways, I think the engineers at Apple very intelligently decided that those are almost non-actionable stress points that are going to stress people out. And it's easier just to tell people, hey, did you get enough sleep? Because, the human mind is this like amazing computer that can do so much more than we can ever imagine. And the reality is, as my favorite quote from Alan Watts, the human mind is like muddy water. Leave it alone and it will settle itself. And sleep, in many ways, is the same kind of thing. If you just allow the time for it to happen, it'll all go according to plan most of the time. So the brain kind of knows what needs to be done. When we look at sleep patterns, I'll often look at things like, bedtimes and wake times, and what's the rhythmicity of that. But we'll also look at things like, how long does it take you to fall asleep? Do you wake up in the middle of the night, and how easily can you fall back asleep if you do? And then a very common thing I see a lot is like just people waking up earlier than they'd want to, and on the inverse, some people sleeping in far later than they would want to. So we look at sleep patterns as well as sleep quantity. As I often tell my patients, we look at both sleep quality and sleep quantity, and those metrics, like how easily you fall asleep, how many times you wake up, can you sleep in the morning? Those are all things that will play a big role in determining like the overall sleep pattern of the person. And the other factor that we might want to get into today is naps. There's people, Glen, that just cannot nap. And to me, that is a marker that on that slider between sleep and wake, there are some people that are amped to be a little more awake. They just drive faster. And there's people that cannot nap. And I think the ability to determine, can someone nap tells us a lot about how they're wired on that spectrum of sleep wake.
So, that's interesting. So let's unpack that a bit. So if you can nap, is that a positive or a negative sign, or just an indicator of where you are on the spectrum?
So it's an interesting, like being too productive a positive or a negative sign? You know what I mean? It's a optimization curve in some way. You know what I mean? And truly, I have patients that I see that high-powered executives that are so on thinking so many things at the same time, multiple parallel, multi-processor parallel processing, right? That the minute they lay down, their brain is just going and going and going, and they can't nap, right? On the inverse, there's people that are just dragging all day, drinking like 6 cups of coffee to just power through the day. And those people, given the chance, would totally clock out for a nap if allowed to do so. In fairness, I should point out that there is also a hybrid, which we see as well. There are people that I run into that are both tired and wired. We call them tired but wired because there's people that are exhausted all day, but they cannot sleep, whether it's a nap or at night. They cannot sleep so well. And those are almost like their own special cluster. But I think as we talk about sleep also, it's important to distinguish between sleepiness and fatigue, because people mess that up all the time, mix it up all the time. Sleepiness oftentimes is like, hey, I'll ask the question, like if we put a bed in front of you, could you nap right now? Could you fall asleep for a half hour? A sleepy person would say, absolutely. There are people that think that they're sleepy, but in reality, they're tired, they're fatigued. And in reality, those people tend to be anxious. They tend to think too much. And given the chance to take a nap, they actually would not be able to fall asleep. And those are the people that are walking around tired but wired. And that's its own metric. So in a nutshell, we have people that are too sleepy, too unmotivated. We have people that are tired but wired, that are dragging through the day but unable to get the restorative sleep that they need. And then there's people that are just amped, lots of energy, lots of ideas, and the need for sleep is relatively low. Now, they can all be high functioning, but at some point, I don't know, nature kind of doesn't like extremes, I think. So at some point, if someone's on either extreme of those, they'll run into trouble. And that's where we come in.
And that is trouble because it doesn't hurt you on that day or maybe even that week, but compounded is where the problem began to occur.
I think the big thing with sleep that is hard for people to understand and hard to work with is that sleep is a slow moving, delayed feedback kind of loop. You need to get good sleep for many nights in a row. You need to be rested for many days in a row to actually feel the benefit. I think in our ADHD society, where we know you want a quick result, the reality is that it's like one night of sleep or one night of good sleep hygiene or napping rarely makes a huge delta. And people often, when they do the right thing and don't see the right outcome, they end up not wanting to repeat the behavior. And that's something we could get into later also. But I think the biggest issue is that there's not enough feedback for them to maintain a healthy pattern. And certainly sleeping too
So,
much.
so how does that?
Sorry, and certainly
No,
sleeping
sorry. Go
too much
ahead.
or
Sleeping too much.
sleeping too much or sleeping too little is, at least by the medical literature, neither one is good. And truly, the best answer is around 7 to 8 hours in a night.
And consistent bedtime.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of circadian rhythms, right? It's circadian because it goes rhythmically through the day. Your plants would not like it if the sun came up 2 hours later in the day than on the weekend than on the weekday.
Does the amount of daylight you get impact your ability to have sleep?
Totally, totally. So daylight plays this tremendous role in resetting our circadian rhythm and also pacing it. There's this concept called Zeitgebers, which is a German word which means clock setters, right? There's certain events that happen during the day that kind of like tell the clock, all right, it's noon, or all right, it's 9 p.m., or it's bedtime. And sunlight plays the biggest role in that. And for a lot of people that have irregular sleep patterns, getting adequate morning light plays a huge role in essentially telling that sleep timer that, okay, check, the day has begun, start the timer.
Hmm.
And that's what we recommend, at least 30 minutes of bright light in the morning, sitting by a window if you're working from home, or getting out for a walk early in the morning plays a huge part in helping your insomnia at the end of the day. Because a lot of people actually end up not getting that light in the morning, and then they get the opposite. They get bright lights at night from blue screens, which throw that clock into completely the opposite direction. And it's worth noting also that blue light is essential. And it's in some ways it makes perfect sense because the sky is blue, right? And your brain is trained to respond to blue light. Blue light means daytime, right? And the worry I have is with all these LED devices, your screen on your laptop, your TV at home, your smartphone, all these devices are blue light emitting, and they're quite bright. And the light in the evening has the completely deleterious effect on the quality of sleep during the night. It certainly can cause insomnia, but even more than that, I've seen many cases where it actually lessens the depth of sleep. So you'll sleep, and this is where we come back to that quantity versus quality thing. Many
Hmm.
people can stay up on their computer for hours before they fall asleep and fall asleep just fine, or even drink coffee before bed and fall asleep just fine. But the sleep quality differs. And that's a very fundamental thing, I think, because there's something to getting deep sleep and there's something to getting light sleep. And the difference is the equivalent of going to the gym and sitting on the bench the whole time, walking softly on the treadmill, or getting a good workout for the half hour that you're on the treadmill. And
Hmm.
blue light and improperly timed sleep, going to bed too late or too early, has that effect of essentially you're out and sleeping, but it's not the restorative sleep it would normally be.
That seems so counterintuitive, though, that you need the light would help. The bright lights in the morning would help you with being able to fall asleep. It's so interesting
Absolutely.
to know that. So sleep is a vital sign for the mind, and so then how does it affect our memory and our mood and anxiety? How does the sleep affect those markers? Because those are all mental states.
Yes to all of the above. There's so much on that. So, a couple of ways, a couple of different angles from which to look at it. If you want to if you want to make like a technological sort of analogy, sleep defragments the hard drive. It takes data and it clumps it together where the data belongs. It does housekeeping at night, right? It packages your learned experiences into meaningful bits and gives them a nice label. It clumps memories together, and you basically have two types of memory that occurs during sleep. One is procedural memory, which is like learning how to play golf or learning how to drive a car or so on. And the other one is declarative memory, which is like just facts. Your brain memorizes and commits things to memory, essentially moving things from short-term storage into long-term committed storage during sleep. And one of the most fascinating things I remember reading is also that if you get poor sleep before you study, you will actually not study as well. And that always, I remember that really fascinated me because if you look at people preparing for an exam or kids studying for a test, it was always like, try to get a good night's sleep before the test. That is definitely important and makes a tremendous difference in people's performance on exams. But what's even more disturbing and fascinating, I think, is that the sleep that you were getting even before you studied matters. because that information has nowhere to go if the hard drive is not decluttered.
Huh.
So
I love
sleep
that
kind of
analogy.
like really clears your mind to learn new things, and then allows those new things to be committed to long-term storage. And now, if you actually want to continue with this analogy, on the day of the exam, being well rested has a profound impact on word recall, fact recall, and the ability for abstract thinking. All of which, on whether it's a presentation, a business interaction that somebody's working on, or any application, having creativity, having facts available readily, and having the speed to process that information in a timely manner are all benefits of a good night of sleep. And I've seen now numerous cases where kids and adults cram before exams, right, or before big things, and they'll lose sleep the night before. Oftentimes, the cost of that far exceeds the benefit of the extra material that they learn. And the time to start sleeping well for an important event is not even the night before. I'd probably say it's about a week before, because that kind of just prepares the mind, that declutters things, it gets you ready. Another really important performance metric that applies throughout mental health that I always find fascinating, I will boil down to something as simple as impulse control. Impulse control is your ability to think before you send that email, or to think through that statement in the document before you reach a conclusion. And there is very clear data that people that are sleep deprived, they look like they have ADHD. And I've had young people come see me also that are sleep deprived that swore to me, Alex, I think I have Alzheimer's. And the answer is no, you don't, because they forget things. They walk into rooms and not know what happened. People introduce themselves, they don't remember their names. Movies are a blur, right? But indeed, for so many people, sleep allows both the memory to take place, but it also helps tremendously with impulse control. And impulse control plays a huge role, not only in your decision-making ability, but also in your mood state and your anxiety. Because if you think about it, anxiety in many ways is an impulse control disorder. Don't think about that IRS letter that you got in the mail a month ago. You know what I mean? There's people that can't stop. And there's people that can say, okay, all right, I'm going to do something about it. Enough. Like, let's close that. Sleep and getting enough of it literally gives you an enhanced superpower to be able to say no, which I think in today's society is a tremendous asset. And in terms of the smoothness, quote unquote, of our days and our ability to interact and our ability to perform at a high level, there has to be some level of impulse control and not responding, not reacting. And the sleep deprived individual tends to react. Your emotions are a little stronger and a little harder to control. And, gone are the days of being, running through the savannah as cave people. And you need to sit through the meeting and stay focused on the task. And indeed, along those lines, I've seen so many patients with ADHD where they would say, Alex, I think my stimulant, my medicine is not working. I can't stay on task. And truly, that's because they're not getting enough sleep.
I never had heard the concept there. What makes a lot of sense, though, that anxiety is an impulse control, connected to impulse control, and that makes a lot of sense.
That's how I see it, and I think also
seeing it.
If you see it from like a more again of a computer analogy, people can get sticky. People can be varying degrees of sticky, and by that I mean how easily can you let go of something. I'll often ask people about obsessiveness and rumination, and just how much they dwell on something before they can move on. And indeed, that too is consistent with like the anxiety optimization curve. There's an optimal amount of anxiety, and then it becomes detrimental. And the answer is to find that perfect amount. Sleep in the background plays a huge role in that, in the ability to navigate that. You can also compound that with people that are sleep deprived, on top of being naturally more impulsive because they didn't sleep well, then they drown themselves in caffeine. And that pushes things even further down the wrong way.
And then also impulse control also connects to diet too, correct?
Absolutely. I treat people for binge eating disorder. Guess when people binge eat? It happens at night. You know what I mean? And think about binging in general as like an impulse control problem, right? Who hasn't had food at night that they should not have eaten in that final pass by the refrigerator at 11:30 on your way to the bedroom? I'll also say that I think staying up late and watching one more video, reading one more blog post, one more, to me is also like a binge behavior. And that's because
Hmm.
your ability to say no is gone. It's the end of the day. You're exhausted. And the amount of exhaustion will directly correlate with how much fatigue, how little sleep you've had the night before. And that's where it's annoying because lack of sleep perpetuates more lack of sleep. Because when it comes time to get to bed on time, now you're like, oh, just one more. And essentially you're impulsive and you can't stop. And that leads to no sleep. And that leads to more impulsivity. And that leads to no sleep. And so it goes.
You were listening to an excerpt of my conversation with Dr. Alex Dimitriu. He's board certified in both psychiatry and sleep medicine. We talk more about sleep as a vital sign with Dr. Dimitriu, and we talk about how sleep works into a high performance lifestyle, the biggest challenges in getting good sleep, and how to overcome them during our guest interview series, which is part of the Be Your Own Best Coach group coaching program. Now we want to hear from you. How will you use what you just heard today? Please leave a comment below. And while you're down there, feel free to comment on other people's comments. That's how we generate a community of helpful ideas and suggestions. Finally, I want to let everyone know to check out BeYourOwnBestCoach.com, where you can find out more information about our 5-week group coaching program. Listeners of Be Your Own Best Coach conversations can take 10% off enrollment costs using the keyword conversations. Thanks again for listening, and stay well.